Good evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's event, the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre and Reparations, a dialogue with students and scholars. This is part of the I Resolve series of public debates hosted by the National Association of Urban Debate Leagues and local urban debate leagues like ours. My name is Ross Faith. I am the executive director of the Tulsa Debate League, a 501c3 urban debate league dedicated to providing debate education for students attending under-resourced schools in Tulsa. Few activities prepare students to succeed in high school, college, and life like debate. Tonight, you will get to see two debaters showcase the power of critical thinking to tackle an issue that is so vital for our community, reparations for the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. A panel discussion will follow with two experts we are fortunate to have their perspectives. The resolution for tonight's debate is: the city of Tulsa should provide substantive financial reparations for the economic damages to the Greenwood community resulting from the 1921 race massacre. The first debater this evening is Ethan Gibbs. Ethan is a junior at Will Rogers College High School in Tulsa. He has been debating since 9th grade. With Jamaica, he represented Tulsa this year at the Urban Debate National Championship. He also enjoys competing in foreign extemporaneous speaking because it allows him to learn about a variety of international issues. Ethan says debate has given him confidence and perspective. The second debater speaking this evening is Jamaica Reed. Jamaica is a sophomore at Will Rogers College High School. She has been debating since 7th grade. With her partner Ethan, who she's facing in this debate, she represented Tulsa at the 2021 Urban Debate National Championship. Jamaica credits debate with giving her a safe place to express herself. In the future, Jamaica plans to become a writer. I would like to thank our event sponsors this evening: Oklahoma Humanities, the George Kaiser Family Foundation, the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission, and the Hilly Foundation. The presenting sponsor of the I Resolve series is the law firm of Massey & Gale. The series sponsor is the Asia Group Foundation. I'd also like to thank the University of Tulsa, where we're hosting this event, and Provost Tracy Manley for their generous use of the facilities for this evening. This program is funded in part by Oklahoma Humanities and the National Endowments for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of OH or NEH. Our moderator for this evening is Hannibal B. Johnson. Mr. Johnson is a Harvard Law School graduate, an author, attorney, and consultant in Tulsa. He is taught at the University of Tulsa College of Law, Oklahoma State University, and the University of Oklahoma. Johnson serves on the federal 400 Years of African American History Commission. He chairs the Education Committee for the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission and serves as a local curator of its world-class History Center, Greenwood Rising. His books, including Black Wall Street 100, An American City Grapples with Its Historical Racial Trauma, chronicle the African American experience in Oklahoma and its indelible impact on American history. Johnson's play, Big Mama Speaks, a Tulsa Race Riot Survivor's Story, was selected for the 2011 Black Theater Festival and has been staged in Co, Switzerland. He has received numerous honors and awards for his work in community service. We are now going to watch a short clip from the HBO series The Watchmen, which reenacts the massacre. Then Mr. Johnson will introduce tonight's debate. Thank you.
African-American attorney H.A. Guest lost his law office in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre on May 31st through June 1st, 1921. Later that summer, he made a passionate call for reparations. Here's what he said: Tulsa will. The question is, will Tulsa rise to the emergency and make good the losses which she has visited upon her colored citizens in the upheaval of June 1st, better known as the Tulsa Race Riot? Will her broad-minded, big-hearted leaders and town and empire builders surrender to the whim of a few political buccaneers and land schemers whose ulterior motive is self-aggrandizement at the expense of the public will? Or will they rush aside some of the cobwebs of legal technicalities and face the issues of facts in a courageous, generous, and altruistic spirit that has so signally characterized the triumphal march at the head of modern civilization of the proud Anglo-Saxon race, and proceed to get on foot plans for the rehabilitation of the burned district? What are some of the things that should be foremost in such a program? Reparations will restore confidence of those whose faith has been seriously shaken. We'll give notice to the outside world that if Tulsa is big enough, strong enough, cosmopolitan enough to match the greatest race riot in American history, she is also generous enough, proud enough, rich enough, and possessing enough respect for law and order, and disdaining anything that savors of greed, graft, and legal oppressions, to fail to do entire justice to a sorely tried people whose accumulations, in many instances of a lifetime, were swept away in a few hours, and two, without any fault on their part. It may very well be said by Tulsa's legal advisors that there is no precedent for reimbursement in such cases, that a bond issue, an election to make good the losses would be illegal. We answer the race riot was also illegal. And since the damages wrought were great also, some way should be found to make good the loss. There is and should be an adequate remedy to adjust every great wrong. H.A. Guest, attorney and massacre survivor, as published in the Oklahoma Sun, August 3rd, 1921. Tonight, we bring the issue of reparations front and center. As Ross noted, our student debaters will address the following resolution. The city of Tulsa should provide substantive financial reparations for the economic damages to the Greenwood community resulting from the 1921 race massacre.
Anti-apartheid and human rights activist Bishop Desmond Tutu once recounted, "True reconciliation is never cheap, for it's based on forgiveness, which is costly. Forgiveness in turn depends on the repentance, which is based on acknowledgement on what was done wrong, and therefore the disclosure of the truth. You cannot forgive what you choose not to know." With these wise words in mind, I stand in strong affirmation of today's resolution. Resolved, the city of Tulsa should provide substantive financial reparations for the immense damage perpetrated on the Greenwood district, Greenwood community, which resulted from the 1921 race massacre. In order for true reparations to be manifested, the city of Tulsa must first genuinely recognize its role in 1921 Tulsa race massacre. The most effective way for the city of Tulsa to atone for its sin, it must fund a common, mandatory, and ongoing curriculum that chronicles the climate that led up to the massacre, the devastating events of the massacre, and the aftermath of one of the most racially motivated domestic terrorism in American history. Specifically, the city of Tulsa should fund an exploration, creation, and implementation of a mandatory secondary curriculum. Additionally, the city government will be hosting listening sessions in every corner of the city, semi-annual for the next 100 years. The current chief of police will be required to attend each listening session. Every police officer currently sworn to protect and serve those to come will be required to attend one listening session annually. These listening sessions will be led by a diverse cohort and the community members that the city would pay to train. By doing so, the city of Tulsa will be taking a major step towards reconciliation, a step that makes material reparations more meaningful. Without reconciliation, any attempt at reparative actions ring hollow and insincere. Which brings me to my first contention, acknowledgement. You can't treat a condition that you refuse to acknowledge. Tulsa leadership has chosen to be in denial for generations over an irrefutable fact that people were cruel and evil enough to bomb the Black community from the air and private planes. That Black people were machine gunned down in the streets and private planes. This might be an uncomfortable fact for the city leadership to acknowledge, but it is a fact nonetheless. A recently discovered manuscript written by the legendary lawyer Buck Colbert Franklin, better known as B.C. Franklin to Tulsans, contains a searing eyewitness account of the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. In the manuscript, Oklahoma lawyer, fame of the father African-American historian John Hope Franklin, writes, "I could see planes circling in midair. They grew in numbers. They hummed, they darted, and they dipped low. I could see them circling. I hear hail falling upon the top of my office building. Down in East Arch, I saw the old Midway Hotel on fire, burning from its top. Another and another and another building began to burn from the tops." If Tulsa citizens truly don't want to repeat the horrors of May 31st, 1921, we must educate our children and ourselves about the reality of what took place here 100 years ago. Knowledge begets ownership, and ownership gives birth to accountability. Now onto my second contention, trust. Distrust between the city of Tulsa and her Black citizens is a crippling vestige of the massacre. The Tulsa police involvement in its deputizing white civilians to control, detain, arrest, and murder Black citizens is an especially heinous action that was committed. It's a total violation of the trust that Black citizens put into the police department. And with this, if this were to happen today, there would be a ferocious outcry. If any American police department were to support a racially motivated act against un-American citizens perpetrated by other American citizens. My plan gives the city of Tulsa a shot of rehabilitating the trust that was broken during the massacre, and that the subsequent years that had followed. Trust starts with the truth and it ends with the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Next, onto my third contention, opportunity. Today with this resolution, we have the opportunity to begin to repair the broken relationship between Tulsa and its Black population. We all believe this city doesn't care about us, and most believe if the Black population of Tulsa were to disappear today, Tulsa would not send a search party to bring us back. So today is an opportunity to repair the hurt still in our hearts, to restart rebuilding a united Tulsa, a Tulsa not divided for the north for the Blacks, south for the whites, and east for the Hispanics. Just giving money to the Black community will not change how the whites think of the Blacks, how Blacks think of the city. So today with this resolution, I seek to give opportunity to the city of Tulsa to repair itself, to rise above the dark past, and to become an example for other cities around the United States of America.
The first personal memory I have of Greenwood comes from eating a giant burger there as a child. The burger was excellent. I knew that. But I didn't know what Greenwood was or what it had once been. I had no idea that a Black Wall Street ever existed. I could not even fathom that people were massacred on the very same streets I skipped on that day. On May 31st, 1921, Black people, Black businesses, Black homes, and a Black legacy was attacked by an angry white mob of domestic terrorists. The once thriving hub of self-determination and resilience was left smoldering in ruin. According to economist Chris Messer of the American Journal of Economics and Sociology, direct property damage from the massacre is estimated north of 20 million in today's dollars. And while the economic theft is staggering, nothing compares to the unfathomable loss of life. It is estimated between 150 and 300 lives were stolen, and countless others' lives were destroyed. And I am no longer that naive child. I know exactly what happened less than 5 minutes away from my family's home in 1921. After gaining this knowledge, I felt like I had gained a perverse X-ray vision that forced me to see the gaping wound that had never been properly redressed in Tulsa, to see the citizens as living, breathing scar tissue. This X-ray vision is not exceptional. It isn't a superpower. Anyone who is willing to be educated about what happened on May 31st in 1921 can gain that same power, the power to see the resulting damage from what happened 100 years ago. And that's why I affirm the resolution, resolved. The city of Tulsa should provide substantive financial reparations for the economic damages to the Greenwood community resulting from the 1921 massacre. I believe the best way for the city of Tulsa to repair the enduring damages caused by the 1921 race massacre is for it to fund a transitional college scholarship for Black students attending the 3 current high schools in North Tulsa: Booker T. Washington, McLean High School, and Tulsa Central High School. The scholarship will be named the Greenwood Victory Scholarship to remind recipients that they are not victims of the past, but rather carriers of a victory for the future. Students who are selected will receive a transitional scholarship of $20,000 to be used throughout their undergraduate studies. Students who choose to attend one of the 107 historically Black colleges and universities in America will receive an additional $20,000, totaling $40,000. I plan to demonstrate that my plan is superior with the following 3 contentions. Education is key, economic revitalization, and these provide a bridge to the past and the future. Which brings me to my first contention: education is key. For generations in America, the most visible evidence of this in the public policy arena has been the persistent attack on education and employment. The saying might ring as cliche, but it is irrefutably true. Knowledge is power. This holds true for our enslaved ancestors who saw the ability to read as freedom. This holds true especially in our modern capitalistic society. In order to get a decent job that pays well, the minimum requirement is a bachelor's degree. Barriers to graduating from college for some Black students is evidenced by the relatively low retention rates of Black students across the nation. A 2018 study commissioned by the United Negro Fund found that among students enrolled in 4-year public institutions, 45.9% of Black students complete their degrees in 6 years. This begs the question, why? Why are so many Black students starting their degrees but not finishing them? The dropout rate is particularly due to the fact that 65% of African American college students are independent, meaning they must balance pursuing a degree with full-time work and family responsibilities. Young people who receive the Greenwood Victory Scholarship can use the money to remove some pressure. On to my next contention, earning potential. According to a decades-long study of 40 states conducted by the Education Trust, the state of Oklahoma ranks 29th out of 40 for Black residents who have attained a college degree, which translates to only 26.6% of Oklahoma's Black residents having an associate's or bachelor's degree. Now, couple this with the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which shows that on average, Black individuals with a bachelor's degree make on average $1,173 a week, while those with a high school diploma earn $712 per week. That's a difference of almost $500 per week. In 2019, the Center on Education and the Workforce at Georgia University reported that in 2019, a Black bachelor's degree holder could expect to earn 84% more over a lifetime than someone with a high school diploma. Obtaining post-secondary education remains the most effective way to achieve economic comfort and generational wealth. And finally, for my third contention, HBCUs provide a bridge to the past and the future. Sometimes it seems we lose sight of the fact that the power of Black Wall Street was not its physical location or geography. Its power was derived from the victorious attitude of collectivism, determination, and resilience exhibited by the Black citizens of Tulsa. When faced with the wickedness of Jim Crow, Black Tulsans, along with many other Black communities in the U.S., decided to create their own fantastically successful self-sufficient community. Historically, Black colleges and universities offer young people the closest modern-day parallel to Black Wall Street. For 100 years, Tulsa's Black young people have been deprived of seeing an economic power center led by adults that look just like them. While this loss is incalculable, the Greenwood Victory Scholarship will help young Black Tulsans experience the modern-day equivalent. The race massacre has a lasting effect on the African American population of Tulsa. Black people carry a hidden shame inside, a shame brought on from years of subjugation and oppression, a shame we spend our whole lives trying to mitigate. Before the Black Wall Street was burned down, it was a center of Black pride and independence. I believe that by giving youth of today a better opportunity, we can resurrect the spirit of Black Wall Street.
Jamaica, your plan of supporting college students is truly wonderful. However, how does your plan help the students who are so disadvantaged that they never make it to the application problem process itself?
Well, a lot of black students don't even consider. Okay. A lot of black. Okay. To answer your question, a lot of black students don't even consider going to college because of the cost and because many people in their family just haven't gone. So I believe that if we give the opportunity, more shall go. Now, Ethan, I believe I understand your perspective, but I still wonder, how does your plan guarantee material health for the black people living in Tulsa today?
By engaging in my plan, we will have the city to acknowledge its role and its past. We will have the city listen to our problems and stop throwing money at the problem and sweeping all of our problems and acting like it never existed in the first place. Now, may I ask a question? Yes. Jamaica, I see the benefits of your plan. However, I wonder how throwing money will bring the city of Tulsa together. And in this case, if we throwing money at this relationship has healed any wounds, and so how does throwing money in this case change anything?
Well, if providing the black youth of today an opportunity to get a higher education and increase their standing is called throwing money at the problem, then I will throw all the money I can. Just talking about these issues isn't going to propel the black youth of today into a better life. Okay, final question, Ethan. I wonder, how will the less understanding and hostile people of Tulsa handle being taught these truths? Could it possibly increase tensions between the two communities?
There will always be hostile and foolish people, but we shouldn't have that fear mindset and mentality be stopping us in our progress. If we go with that type of mentality, we wouldn't have voting rights as of today.
Thank you.
My opponent's plan is admirable. Who in their right mind would argue about giving more black students from Tulsa the opportunity to attend and complete college? However, my problem with my opponent's plan is that it puts the cart before the horse. You cannot repair what you choose not to acknowledge. We learn in the principle of accountability early in life. For example, in kindergarten, when one child pulls another child's hair, the teacher doesn't tell the hair puller that they can make the situation better by giving them an extra juice box. That would be absurd. What does the teacher tell the hair puller? Well, the teacher tells the hair puller that that accountability matters and that you should apologize for your actions. Our city can learn a lot from an equality and tragic and triumphant example of Rwanda. The best recent example of a radical reconciliation can be found in the transformative work that the people of Rwanda have committed to nearly 27 years ago, and during one of the worst genocides in human history. In 1994, the world watches thousands of the country's Hutus ethnic majority unleash unspeakable violence on the Tutsi minority. In just 100 days, nearly 1 million people perished. And in the decades since these atrocities, Rwanda emerged a unique experiment in a national reconciliation. First, post-genocide government made a genuine attempt at bringing justice to those who murdered their own neighbors. The reconciliation process in Rwanda focused on the reconstruction on the Rwandan identity, as well as balancing justice, peace, truth, and security. In the country, different measures have been taken by the Rwandan government towards achieving this goal. For example, on the last Saturday of every month, every single Rwandan drops what they're doing and engage in community service, a custom called umuganda. Each neighborhood organizes this differently depending on what the community needs. The purpose of umuganda is to rebuild and strengthen the ties that bind. We can achieve the same level of collectivism and community in Tulsa. One Tulsa could be more than just an empty market device. It could be a reality. But first, the city of Tulsa must admit and atone for what took place here 100 years ago. My opponent's plan, while intentioned, lets the city off the hook.
My opponent's plan naively suggests that the knowledge of the past alone ensures the past won't repeat itself. This is not only a false premise, but it is dangerous. Last summer, the entire world watched as unarmed black person after unarmed black person was executed at the hands of the police. One state's curse in particular gained worldwide attention because of its brazen mix of cruelty and audacity. On May 25th, 2020, the life of George Floyd, a 46-year-old unarmed black man, was extinguished. For 9 excruciating minutes and 29 seconds, the knee of Officer Derek Chauvin relentlessly restricted Mr. Floyd's air passages, ultimately resulting in his death. The entire world saw this modern-day lynching. People took to the streets in every corner of the globe. The knowledge of this event was deep and wide. And yet, according to the Washington Post, there have been 16 black men killed by the police since George Floyd. This proves that knowledge of the past is not enough to prevent its reoccurrence. I understand what my opponent is proposing, but we've been talking about slavery. We've been talking about segregation. We've been talking about Jim Crow and voter suppression. We've been talking about police brutality and inequalities in education. We have been talking for decades, but people still don't care. White fragility reigns supreme. Black trauma has been commodified. Black stories have been exploded. The internet is filled with example after example of modern day minstrels. People are desensitized. By doing my plan, we will help our black kings and queens gain more than a conversation. We will help them rise and destroy the power systems that oppress them. My opponent's plan won't do that. My opponent's plan can't do that.
It is time to acknowledge the past and the crimes committed against the black people of this city. The Tulsa Race Massacre was more than just one day, night, a week of repair. It was a scar slashed across every face of every black person who called Tulsa home. We cannot allow the city to pay off its debt and go unhinged. As the pennies they throw at me, at us, the black community, wouldn't even amount to the generational damage that was committed and done to our wealth, psychic, and community. If nearly 1 million people could die in just 100-day Rwanda, and they still found a way to reconcile, why is it impossible for the city of Tulsa and her citizens to do the same? No, it is time to acknowledge, trust, and give opportunity to every black Tulsan. This city cannot survive another 100 years stratified as it has been for the past 100 years. It's time to stop throwing money and empty apologies at this problem and start to solve with true reconciliation.
In conclusion, I say this. Providing Tulsa's knowledge of the massacre alone will not solve any of the present suffering Black Americans face in this city. By giving us the Greenwood Victory Scholarship, we start to repair the economic prosperity lost 100 years ago. By helping Black Tulsans receive an education, increase their earning potential, and encouraging HBCU membership, we start to repair our self-image, to repair the shame we encounter every day by seeing the lack of resources and opportunities. You see, other parts of Tulsa are swimming in those resources and opportunity, while we're drowning from the lack thereof. My plan serves as the life jacket that the Black youth of Tulsa needs today. Voting for my plan provides resources right now to the Black citizens of Tulsa. It forces the city of Tulsa to put its money where its mouth is. It is the only way to guarantee material conditions for my people improve in this debate. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Ethan and Jamaica. Excellent work. We're now going to transition to the second part of the evening, which is the dialogue with our two esteemed panelists, led by Hannibal B. Johnson. So I'm going to let Mr. Johnson take the floor. Thank you.
There are at least two types of possible reparations. Economic reparations, which might include cash reparations, cash payments, scholarships, and development assistance. And then there are knowledge and information-centered reparations, which might include museums and history centers, public parks, markers and monuments, and curriculum reform initiatives in public schools. In addition, there might also be a South African-style truth and reconciliation process. A key difference here, though, is that in Tulsa, the seminal event happened in 1921, 100 years ago. And with few exceptions, perpetrators and victims are no longer living. Now, let's meet our distinguished panelists. First up, Michele Roberts. Michele Roberts is the first woman to head a major professional sports union in North America. In her role as executive director, Ms. Roberts serves as the primary advocate for all players, ensuring the protection of the organization and its membership, including serving as the lead negotiator in all collective bargaining activities. Prior to this selection, Ms. Roberts was a renowned trial lawyer and member of Skadden, Arps, Slate, Mager, and Flom's litigation group. She's a frequent lecturer and presenter to both the bench and bar on a variety of topics related to litigation and trial practice. Our second panelist is John W. Rogers Jr. John W. Rogers Jr. is a founder, chairman, co-chief executive officer, and chief investment officer of Ariel Investments, headquartered in Chicago. Mr. Rogers founded Ariel Investments in 1983 to focus on undervalued small and medium-sized companies. Mr. Rogers' passion for investing started when he was 12 years old, when his father bought him stocks instead of toys for every birthday and for Christmas. His interest grew while majoring in economics at Princeton University. Mr. Rogers was highlighted alongside legendary investors Warren Buffett, Sir John Templeton, and Ben Graham in the distinguished book, The World's 99 Greatest Investors by Magnus Angenfeld. He is the recipient of numerous honors and awards. Now that we've met our distinguished guests, let's get to the heart of the matter. Our first question, which is for both panelists, starting with Ms. Roberts. Question: is reparations primarily a race issue, even a blackness issue? That is the discussion of reparations primarily and necessarily grounded in American chattel slavery and its legacy? Ms. Roberts.
So that's got to be like a freebie question, right? Because the answer is, in my view, obviously yes. And by the way, I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. Certainly within the context of what we're talking about tonight, it is undeniably related to race. What happened in Tulsa in 1921 happened because the residents of Greenwood were Black. And the men, and I suppose women who did what they did on those 2 or 3 days were clearly white. And that had nothing to do, it's like that, it had everything to do with the fact that that community was African American. So if we're talking about reparations within the context of what happened in Greenwood, it would be ridiculous, I don't apologize for that word, to suggest that we could do that without regard to race. There are very few, sadly, issues in our country today that aren't related to race, but certainly within the context of what we're talking about tonight, we can't deny that race is prominent with respect to where we have to go in addressing these issues.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Well, I don't have a lot, it's great to be here with Michele, and this is a wonderful opportunity, but I have to say, I echo everything she had to say there. She handled that one perfectly, so I don't have a lot to add on that one, but I'm sure the next question, I'll be excited about it, helping to answer.
What would you say to those who argue that even the discussion of reparations is divisive and that we should not focus on past bad actors and actions?
Well, we've been working on this for a number of years, and my firm and myself personally, we got very involved in trying to support before they die efforts, because we thought it was so important to get reparations for those families before they passed away. And it was just critical to have that happen. I think we have to make sure that these families who suffered so much in multi-generational wealth that's been lost, we have a responsibility to try to even the playing field and create equal and real opportunity for these families that had so much taken away from them. And as you know, my great-grandfather had the Stratford Hotel that was completely destroyed during the riots and the massacre, and his life was never the same. And he had to escape Tulsa because he might have been lynched himself because people saw him as such a leader in the community in the past. So I guess I have a self-interest in saying, but I just think it's clearly the right thing to do to bring reparations and to resolve this today.
The only thing I would add is that what happened on those 2 or 3 days didn't end on those 2 or 3 days. The legacy of those riots are and have continued to be experienced and sustained in the suffering of African Americans in Tulsa since then. I mean, you destroyed an economy, right? I mean, an entire economy created and supported and generated by African Americans was destroyed. And it wasn't as if on that Thursday it was cool, right? For the next 80, 90, 100 years, we have continued to have to contend with the consequences of having destroyed an African American economy. And so the notion that, well, that was a long time ago, let's move on, is nonsense. We've not moved on because the consequences of what happened back in 1921 have not moved on. So of course, it makes sense to talk about reparations because the harm continues to be contended with.
Another question for you, Ms. Roberts, directed specifically for you. You were a key member of the legal team led by Professor Charles Ogletree, Harvard Law School, that prosecuted the case for reparations in federal court here in Oklahoma back in 2003. What lessons did you learn from that litigation, and what did it suggest about the path forward for reparations?
Well, first off, kudos to Charles Ogletree. He is an extraordinary man, extraordinary lawyer, and it certainly led to my involvement in the litigation. He and Johnny Cochran and Randall Robinson and some of the other great lawyers were part of that effort. I think the lesson that was learned from our perspective was that the law has so much promise in terms of being able to deliver justice. Our biggest impediment was that the law also said, well, you got this thing called a statute of limitations that suggested if you don't get to court in 2 years, then you can't get to court at all. So our biggest struggle was to try to figure out a way to have an exception to that statute. But the beauty of the litigation was, despite the legal impediments that we had to contend with, the community and Tulsa and the state, and in some ways the country, said, okay, there is this statute of limitation, but we all acknowledge that there was a horrible wrong that was done, and we've got to figure out a way to remedy it. And so my hope is that even the not too terribly sufficient remedies that Tulsa has tried to enact, but there's still some ways that we can bring forward reparations to this community, because this really happened, and sweeping it under the rug has not been effective and will not be effective. The very fact that we're having this conversation today in 2021 suggests otherwise.
Mr. Rogers, you mentioned specifically your great-grandfather, J.B. Stratford, who owned the Stratford Hotel, was an attorney, very prominent Black citizen in Tulsa. And in testimony to Congress, you once asked members to, quote, imagine what the Stratford Hotel or the Greenwood section of Tulsa known as Black Wall Street would be like today had Greenwood not been destroyed. In your view, Is it possible that Greenwood could have become the cultural mecca for Black entrepreneurs that Atlanta has become had the massacre not happened? What if, for example, you had built your business here? How might Tulsa have been different?
Well, I think for sure, if we had really been given an opportunity to let Tulsa thrive, it would have created an opportunity not only for those great businesses that were there then and that would have evolved into newer businesses and modern businesses. You know, the grandkids and great grandkids of those families would have been able to create large law firms, accounting firms, money management, mutual fund companies like our company. We would be able to do business with each other and create enormous amount of wealth, and then prove to white America that we can do things just as well as white Americans can. And so I think you would have had large Black businesses of scale that would have come out of Tulsa, since it was such a vibrant and successful business. You know, so much of the reasons we haven't been able to succeed in our society is not only the systemic racism and the Jim Crow laws, but we haven't had the ability to see people like ourselves grow and thrive in the parts of the economy where the wealth and power and jobs are created today. So I think that would have all come through this whole great success of what would have happened if Tulsa had been allowed to thrive. And my great-grandfather's hotel would have been able to create multi-generational wealth, which would have created multi-generational opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts, let's talk about reparations in sort of a broad sense, to make amends or to repair damage. Now, I talked about economic reparations and knowledge information centered reparations. There are individual reparations and communal reparations. What is the bundle of reparations that would be on your wish list for an event like the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre? And how do you prioritize the attainment of those reparations?
So I think all of the above, right? Which is why both Ethan and Jamaica were right. I mean, all that, right? All that needs to be part of what we're talking about when we're talking about reparations. And you know, we can disagree about what's more important than the other, but all of that has to be part of the melody of things that we include, because this issue is complicated, and the answers and the resolutions are complex as well. So none of that should be sacrificed. We need to have conversations. You know, we need to talk about reconciliation. We need to talk about putting revenue back into the communities to make up for, you know, the shortcomings that we've had to sustain. All of that, and I don't care to argue about, you know, the margins. If we can agree that that entire bundle needs to be in the bundle, then we've gone as pretty darn far. But you know, I was listening to Jamaica and Ethan saying, "Yep, yep, yep," because they're both right.
Okay. What say you, Mr. Rogers?
Well, can you sort of ask that question in a different way? In what context? How would you like us?
Let's look specifically at the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Do you have a preferred order of the types of reparations that you would like to see? Is there anything that should be off the table? Is there anything that should be skyrocketed to number one priority?
Well, I think it's the direct descendants that were alive and should be the number one priority. But I do think there is a responsibility that the Tulsa, the city itself, and the anchor institutions in Tulsa should have a commitment to hire family members into important roles in all the anchor institutions that are here in Tulsa, whether it's the local utilities, the local banks, the local insurance companies, the museums, the hospitals, the universities, making sure that these families have first opportunities to have real great careers that they deserve after they get the great educations that was brought up during the debates this evening. There also should be a real commitment to do business with minority-owned companies. And you talked about Atlanta, and you know what Maynard Jackson insisted on, that African Americans have an opportunity to do business in everything that Atlanta bought. And he pushed all the anchor institutions in Atlanta to work with minority companies. So there's no reason why Tulsa leadership couldn't live the values of Maynard and push hard to make sure there's true economic opportunity for African American businesses and African American business leaders in Tulsa.
Great, thank you. Back to Ms. Roberts. This is sort of a lawyerly question, I guess. Reparations usually are sought from government. We have three principal branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. We know that reparations were awarded to, for example, survivors and heirs of the Rosewood Massacre from 1923. We know that people who were interned during World War II, people of Japanese ancestry, were awarded reparations by United States Congress. Are there limitations to pursuing reparations through litigation and the judicial process, as opposed to, for example, the legislative or the executive process?
Yeah. So, and it is a great question for lawyers. It's if we're talking about the ease of litigation, it is frankly easier to litigate against a municipality, a state government, federal government. When you start talking about going after institutions, and it's been done, and there's been litigation filed against financial institutions, educational institutions, to some extent individuals, those are more challenging. They're not impossible, but they're much more challenging. All of us have to, and no matter who you go after, you have to deal with the statute of limitations. But frankly, it is an easier lift to go after, or at least to file in relation to state governments, because what's easier to demonstrate is that rather than a single human being, a single family may have benefited from some wrongdoing, it's a less, the burden is not as challenging if you're going after a state or municipality. So lawyers in this space typically try to litigate against government institutions as opposed to private institutions or private citizens.
One of the things I hear when reparations discussions come up from some folks is reparations, once implemented, allow folks to say, now we're done, let's move on to the next thing. What's your response to that, Mr. Rogers?
Well, I think, we've never had, again, we haven't had a chance to really test it very often in this country to see if that's the case. But I think that is a risk. We could get a modest reparations and our society would continue to go backwards. The wealth gap in this country is dramatically worse than it was in 1970 nationally. The dean of Yale's Business School, Kerwin Charles, has all this data that shows that between 1940 and 1970, wealth gap closed, and from 1970 to today, it's widened dramatically. Today versus white Americans, we're worse off than our grandparents were. So it's just extraordinary. In my hometown in Chicago, 20 years ago, of the top 150 privately held companies, we had 3 African Americans. Not great, but 3 out of 150. Today, this week, Cranes came out with another list of the top 150 companies. There's 0 African American companies in the top 150. We are going backwards very, very rapidly. There's very few people fighting for true economic opportunity for African American businesses. All African American businesses are small, except maybe Robert Smith with Vista, who's a multi-billionaire. But everybody else is running small businesses compared to anyone else. So there's an enormous amount left to do. So small reparations will not solve the problem. We have to fight the systemic racism, the unconscious and conscious biases that are still there, the lack of opportunity that comes our way because of not only the historical racism, but of course the segregation that we've lived through in our major cities that doesn't give us the opportunity for the social networks we need to build our businesses and thrive and grow. We don't have grandparents and uncles and aunts who, have jobs as CEOs and CFOs and general counsels of major corporations that can open up doors for us, or are sitting on boards that can open up doors for us. So there's an enormous amount left to do. And it's just so unfortunate that, as Dr. King often said, progressive white Americans deplore prejudice, but accept or ignore economic injustice. this economic injustice is critical issue for our country. And it just, again, won't be resolved with short-term small reparations.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts, anything to add on that? The question of the finality of reparations?
The only thing, of course, I agree completely with what John said. The only thing I would say is the notion that there could be a check written that would settle it is preposterous. With the systemic and structural change that has to happen, it can't be resolved by writing a check, which is why we don't. Those involved in this discussion don't say, okay, if you write this check, we're all good. It doesn't work that way. It's much more, as I mentioned earlier, much more complex than that.
Thank you. Next, just a general question, because I get this question often in talking about this history. And I get it from white folks who want to be allies. What would you ask of a white ally in terms of this quest for reparations, either specifically for the Tulsa Race Massacre or generally for slavery, et cetera?
Well, I guess I talked a little bit about this already, but I think white Americans need to help educate their brethren about how much worse things are today than they were, as I said, 50 years ago in 1970. I've seen polling done on this. Most white Americans think because of the civil rights movement that things are better for African Americans. Even, a lot of black people think that. But, one other data point I use, the Federal Reserve of St. Louis says that between 1992 and 2016, roughly 25-year period, college-educated blacks saw their wealth decline 10%, while college-educated blacks saw their wealth decline. College-educated blacks saw their wealth decline 10% over that 25-year period, while college-educated whites saw their wealth increase 96%. So that's pretty incredible. Up 96% for whites, down 10% for blacks. White America needs to know there's a false premise that things are okay because of the civil rights movement, and we are catching up because of affirmative action initiatives. Nothing could be further from the truth. And of course, you solve problems in entirely different ways if you think you're already on the path to solutions or when you're going the opposite direction. So we need white Americans to educate each other of how big a crisis this is. And ultimately, they're going to lose control of this country. The kind of rioting and things that we've seen in our urban communities because of what's happened with George Floyd and other, that's just going to be a small drop in the bucket compared to what will be 10, 15 years from now if this wealth gap continues to get worse and worse. And we're locked out of economic opportunities while white Americans are making billionaires running hedge funds and private equity funds and tech firms through all their relationships and opportunities that are given to them and that are not for our community and our people.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts?
Yeah, I think I say it often, and maybe too often. Check out your house, figure out what you can do to improve your house. I mean, certainly in the last 12 months, there have been a lot of companies who have professed to be interested in doing something to equalize the imbalances in our country. And these same companies have nobody that looks like me in their boardrooms, no one that looks like me in their senior management ranks, nobody that looks like me in any position of authority, yet they profess to be interested in doing something to make the world and the country better. Well, let's start by taking a look at your house and figuring out, what you can do to improve diversity and inclusion. What you can do to help pipeline some of these opportunities for communities of color. There's tons of work to be done, but a lot of it has to be done in your house, and that's frankly what I do tell folks that want to be allies. Don't think that you're good, because you may not be, and you probably aren't. And so just take a look, make sure you're cool, and then we can talk about other things that we can do collectively.
I want to bring the discussion up to current for a moment. I'm going to start with Ms. Roberts. And I want to talk about something that we frame under the rubric of systems of anti-Blackness in the Greenwood Rising, which is a new history center that we're opening here on June the 2nd. So Laura Ingraham once famously told LeBron James to shut up and dribble. And it's clear that he and other NBA players have a different worldview. Last summer, in the wake of the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, so many other Black Americans, NBA players were at the forefront of the demand for change. Now, how have you supported your players in their efforts to use their platform for good? And what has it taught you about the potential for societal change?
Well, you're right. LeBron and others told Miss Ingram in no uncertain terms, we're not going to shut up and dribble. I mean, these are men, and I would throw into the conversation the women, who professional basketball players, have been unequivocal in their desire and commitment to using their platforms to engage in securing justice in their communities. What have I learned? I've learned that I'm proud to work for them. That's what I've learned. I've learned that their influence is incredibly impactful, and that it can and has made a difference. I don't, for 1 second, allow anyone to suggest that many of the things that happened in the last election, and both in November and certainly in Georgia, were not impacted by our players and other athletes' insistence that they be a part of the conversation. So, all of us have a responsibility in the community to do what we can and to use our influence and our platforms. The beauty is that we can all proudly say that African-American athletes are not reneging on their responsibility to lean into. So the lesson I've learned is you got a pretty good job because you work for some pretty extraordinary men and women.
Great, thank you. Mr. Rogers, you were among 72 Black executives that spoke out against voting restrictions in Georgia and other states. How can business leaders leverage their influence to create change as well?
Well, I think that one of the things we've been talking a lot about, and Michele is very kind to come to our Black Directors Conference every year that we have for African Americans that are on corporate boards. And it's been a thrilling experience to see, 200 Black directors come and learn from each other how they can help each other, how to learn to be leaders in the boardroom. And we've come up with 3 Ps that we want all of our directors to live by when they get back home and join not only the corporate boards they're on, but all the nonprofit boards they serve on and all the rest. Those 3 Ps are: one is philanthropy. We want all of Black directors to come back to their corporate boards and say, we want to keep track of the spending and see how much of the money is going to cultural institutions, hospitals, universities, and museums versus going to civil rights groups, economic justice groups, voting rights groups, things that really impact our community. And so keeping track of that and being intentional about it. The second P is people. We want to promise each other that we're going to not only look at the entire diversity of the company on the board that we're on, but look at the diversity at the C-suite, general counsel, CEO, CFO, who's on the management committee, who's in the leadership, really understanding that and having it done by race. So many times people want to tell you the diversity of their employment, but not tell you about it by Black and brown people. And so to be intentional about that, we think is important. And then finally, we want to measure purchasing, because we believe you build multi-generational wealth and opportunity by having strong Black businesses. I grew up in Chicago where we had these giant businesses that influenced all of us. Johnson Publishing with Ebony and Jet. We know how important it was when he had, covers with Emmett Till and what it meant for our community. What George Johnson did with Afro Sheen and Ultra Sheen was so empowering. And he worked with Black businesses, Black lawyers, Black accountants, Black advertising agency. He was a one-man ecosystem. So we want to have more successful Black businesses. So the third P is keeping track of the purchasing by category, so that people can't pull the wool over your eyes with just one big construction contract or one big catering contract, which are important businesses. But the wealth and power in today's society come through private equity, venture capital, professional services, and technology. And I always say it's a modern day Jim Crow if the Black and brown people get to do the catering and the construction, and the white guys get the opportunities in these parts of the economy, the wealth created today. So if we keep track of that spending by category and don't allow all the economic opportunities to go to white men when they walk into that boardroom. We can transform our communities and transform our society. And it's up to us. We had the late Congressman John Lewis come to our conference one year, and he reminded us when we see things that are unjust, that are morally not right, we have a responsibility to speak up and speak out and make good trouble. So it's up to us. I say at the conference every year, us as Black executives don't point out and fight for each other in these boardrooms. The white guys aren't going to come and decide to do it on their own. And I always tell my board member friends, if you don't fight for economic justice in the boardroom, you're more part of the problem, not part of the solution, because the wealth divide is just going to get larger and larger and larger. And if we get further behind, that means if you're not wealthy, you're going to have poorer health care, you're going to have poorer job prospects, you're going to have poor housing, you're going to have poorer education. Everything is tied to wealth. Social justice is tied to economic justice.
Yeah.
Ms. Roberts, when I talk about the 1920 Tulsa Race Massacre, which I do a lot, I often frame it as emblematic of the historical racial trauma that was endemic in the United States in the early part of the 20th century. Is that framing historical racial trauma, is that helpful? And if so, how so?
It's accurate. It's certainly accurate. I mean, we are in a period of trauma right now. I mean, those of us who have been around for a minute weren't shocked at what happened to Breonna or George Floyd, but I've been saying this for a minute. There's now a generation of African Americans that are traumatized by what happened to Breonna and George, and then to Jacob Blake, and now what's happened in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, I mean, it's an accurate description, but it's not a suggestion that we surrender. I mean, like any trauma, it's got to be resolved and worked through. And we, as a people, have done it, and we will do it again. But there's no pretending that what happened in the 20s in Greenwood and what happened in Florida, all of that was a horrible period in our history. But the beauty of Black people is that we get through. We fight through. We get stronger, and this is another period of time. We have to get through it, and we will. So I wouldn't apologize for that characterization, because it's true. That was damage, and damage is real. But repair and remedy and cure is also real. And as a people, we've demonstrated that we can get through it. We will.
Question for you both. Recently, House Bill 40 passed in House of Representatives, at least, and it's been introduced and reintroduced year after year after year after year. So it looks like we're finally going to get a study on reparations with respect to chattel slavery. Is that something that we should be excited about, that we should celebrate, that we should welcome? What are your thoughts on that?
You start, John.
Well, thank you. I just was going to say it's just an honor to be on the panel with Michele, and her leadership's been so important on so many of these issues. And I was going to say earlier, when she comes to our Black Directors Conference, and President Obama came one year, and President Obama thought that Michele was the star of the conference. He was so excited to talk with her because of her leadership and courage and the things that she fights for.
That's very kind.
So I just wanted to say that, because it's true. But I'm sorry, can you rephrase that question again? I'm sorry.
It's just the seeming passage of House Bill 40, at least passed in the House, that will, facilitate a study about reparations for slavery. Is that something we should be excited about?
I think it's exciting as a part of a negotiation tool to get fair opportunity, economic opportunity in this country. I think the more that we push for and articulate the challenges that we face as a society and the unfairness that we face, to keep educating white America about that, I think that's critically important. We all know it's going to be very difficult to actually see it come to fruition in the kind of divided country that we have today. And, we don't have a filibuster-proof Congress. And, so it'll be very difficult. But I think it is helpful in the negotiation as we try to get more and more fairness. And I know President Biden and his group are out there, pushing for a more economic fairness.
Ms. Roberts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, whether or not it gets beyond a conversation, getting it to a conversation level is a victory, right? So if we can have at least some discussion about it, that we can be part of the cycle, the media cycle. We know how hard it is to get some attention. So yeah, I mean, look, in the last 4 years, we knew that would never be a subject of conversation in the Congress. We now know that it can be, and whether or not we can expect it'll go beyond that, I don't know. But this is still, in my view, a step forward.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to appoint both of you distinguished senior advisors to the population of Tulsa. What would be your altar call to those of us in Tulsa who want to see reparations of some sort? What is it that we should do first and thereafter?
Well, again, to reiterate what I said earlier, I think you could do that more specifically in Tulsa. I think that the Tulsa community needs to be educated. As I've done my homework, I understand that Tulsa is just like Chicago is, that the lack of economic businesses of scale or size is remarkably small. The number of success stories for Black-owned businesses is very small, nothing of true scale, or just basically close to nothing. I'm sure there's always exceptions somewhere. Very few African Americans in the C-suite and management committees of the major corporations. I think that is something that just needs to be more and more exposed in Tulsa. And the lack of opportunities in the professional services ranks. I'm sure there are very few Black partners at the law firms, accounting firms, money managers, consultants that are in Tulsa. So if I was giving advice, I'd make sure that we get all that data and understand fully how little we are fully engaged in participating in the capitalist democracy of this country, and then in Tulsa specifically. And I think when people see it out there to the naked eye, and they see how bad the data is, in this environment, I think you can hope for change and hope for opportunity. But you have to make it crystal clear how much further behind we continue to fall.
Yeah, I couldn't improve on. I couldn't improve on that. John's obviously said it all. I would only add that maybe we should take Ethan and Jamaica's notes and use them as a bit of a template for part of where we move going forward. They were remarkable, and they, as I said, they were both right.
Yeah, they were terrific. I completely agree. Congratulations on
Indeed.
Wonderful debate.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Excellent. Any parting thoughts from either of you before we wrap things up here? It's been a pleasure visiting with you, albeit briefly.
I'd only say thank you for allowing me to remember how important the work is with respect to this incident. It was Charles Ogletree, who's my God, brought me on, and it was one of the most impactful things I've done professionally and personally. And I appreciate an opportunity to come back to Tulsa and be part of the conversation again. So thank you.
I would say too, even my mom and my family was very involved in a lot of the reparation discussions. Charles Ogletree was also very, very helpful in bringing me involved and getting me involved in some of the documentaries that were being done earlier, and the Before They Die movement. So Charles is such an influence. I just continue to think that there's so much potential, and it's so great that this is being exposed to the world, because what's happened in Tulsa is we know what's happening in other parts of the country that people just didn't get to know. And so this is really shining a light on these historic moments in our history that we're not proud of. And the final thing I would say, I know you mentioned my mom earlier. I didn't realize till later, but she brought me up in Hyde Park on Greenwood Avenue in Chicago. And I'm not sure, she never told me if she found Greenwood Avenue on purpose or it just happened to be there. And because of her success and her pioneering efforts as a lawyer, the street is now named the honorable, it's an honorable street sign, Jules Stratford L'Enfant.
Wow.
And
That's great.
she would be so proud of that. But the final point to that is, on the other corner, a block from where I grew up, and a block from where Valerie Jarrett grew up, President Obama and Michelle Obama have their home on Greenwood Avenue in Chicago.
Wow.
So I'm not sure how many people know that, but it's kind of nice to have that history and that connection to our great former president.
That's terrific. That's great.
Well, thank you both. I want to close with powerful words from Amos Wilson, the late African-American theoretical psychologist, social theorist, Pan-African thinker, scholar, author, professor of psychology, City University of New York. He said, "Justice requires not only the ceasing and desisting of injustice, but also requires either punishment or reparation for injuries and damages inflicted for prior wrongdoing. The essence of justice is the redistribution of gains earned through the perpetration of injustice. If restitution is not made and reparations not instituted to compensate for prior injustices, those injustices are in effect rewarded. And the benefits of such rewards conferred on the perpetrators of injustice will continue to draw interest, to be reinvested, and to be passed on to their children, who will use their inherited advantages to continue to exploit the children of the victims of the injustices of their ancestors. Consequently, injustice and inequality will be maintained across the generations, as will their deleterious social, economic, and political outcomes." A special thanks to our young presenters this evening and to all those who joined in the conversation. Thank you, and go in peace.